Happy Monday. How's it going, everybody?
It's going well. Good to be here. Welcome, Sanjeev.
I'm so happy to be on this podcast. Thank you.
So happy to have you here.
It was great to meet you last month in person. The data-driven NYC scene out here is pretty cool.
Yes, likewise. Yeah, data is such an exciting place these days, and it's like every day is amazing. And this week is great because it's Thanksgiving week in the US. World Cup soccer is going on in Qatar, so a lot of fun things going on. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
You got a favorite team for soccer?
I've always liked Germany and Spain, but Brazil and Argentina would be the other ones that I like. England should be my favorite one. I have some allegiance to England, but unfortunately, I don't know how far they'll go. Although today they did amazing.
Yeah, they always flame out, right? They should be the best, and they always seem to flame out.
So, yeah. I wish, they would win. So.
How about you, Joe? I can't claim to have a favorite these days.
I don't really watch, I guess, football or soccer, whatever it is. But it was Chris Tabb took me to go watch Tottenham when I was in London last month. So that was pretty cool to watch. But
okay, I have to go hang with Chris just to go watch Tottenham. Honestly,
you should go watch. You should go watch British football. It's hilarious. And of course, every stereotype you could think of going to and from the stadium was there. Like lots of beer drinking, fist fights after. It was pretty hilarious. So.
I just realized when I was growing up back in India when I was a kid, most people in my age group had only two dreams: grow up to be either a football player or an astronaut.
Really?
Yeah, those were the two dreams we had.
I mean, football player is way easier than astronaut, I think, statistically speaking, right?
But astronaut, you can train and learn and, get there. Football, I think the competition is like just maddening. I mean, you really have to be in the top 0.005% to make
Actually, I bet it would be harder to become a successful professional soccer player versus an astronaut. Yeah.
Well, and I think astronaut appeals to people like us because these days it's a lot of PhDs and master's degrees in engineering who become astronauts, right? So,
yeah, I mean, I'm sure, Matt, you grew up watching Space Camp, that movie back in the 80s.
It's so nerdy. I saw it once back in the 80s.
Well, awesome. Well, cool. And for the audience, if my voice sounds a bit raspy, it's because I have I'm getting a bit of a cold or something. So got kids who've been cold for a bit. So anyway, you have to keep on giving. Cool. So today we're going to talk about the current market conditions, how it's affecting the IT landscape, and a lot more. So, Sanjeev, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. Thank you. So everyone, those who don't know me, my name is Sanjeev Mohan. I now have my own company called SanjMo. Actually, now I've had it for 1 year and 4 months.
Congrats.
I can't believe how time has flown. Last year, up until July, I was at Gartner and leading the research agenda for data and analytics for my team. Really having a great time, learned so much, built such a great network of people that I get to hang around with. But then I decided, there's so much happening in the space. It's probably, I want to expand my horizon, do all kinds of different initiatives. So I took a big risk. And for the first time in my life, I decided to go independent, not knowing anything what lay in front of me. And it's been an amazing ride since I went independent. So now I get to hang out and do all kinds of webinars and shows. In fact, here's a funny thing. I was planning a trip over the holidays to India and turned it into a business trip because now we're going to do a meetup in Bangalore. And not only that, got a chance to, so I just mentioned it to Google friends I have at Google Cloud. And they're like, well, why don't you host it in our facility? So now Google is part of the sponsor. So that's what I do now. So I'm independent advisor.
So. And that part is really cool, right? It takes a while to get there. Like you develop some expertise as a consultant, and then you go independent, and it takes some years before you really build it up. But once you get there, it's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of work.
Well, and Sanjeev, I think you had the benefit of having an established reputation, being in the field. I mean, Gartner's, I think very reputable.
Oh, yeah.
And, I have to say one thing. Since you guys have such a great platform. So I just want to share something, one of my big revelations, and that was in July 2021 when I left. I did a LinkedIn post saying that I feel I've accumulated all this knowledge about market and products that I want to put it to good use, and hence I'm leaving. I was wrong. It's not my knowledge. You guys have written book on data engineering and are writing more books. So people know far more than I'll ever know. It was my network that I did not realize at that point. It's the close connections that I have with the community that really came to me and said, "Oh, great! Now we can approach you directly. We don't have any layers of approvals and high fees or whatever." So that's how I have engaged with my group of friends and people in the network.
That's really awesome. Yeah, and when I hear people asking advice, when we hop into kind of segue into the topic, but especially career advice, how to navigate, a changing market and stuff. The number one thing I say is your network is everything. It will always be everything. So, then the old Warren Buffett quote: "The best time to plant a tree was yesterday. The next best time is today," and so forth. Somebody said that, I don't know, but anyway, but it's absolutely true. So your network is everything, right? And I think that's why we're all where we are.
Correct. And other career advice. Sorry, we have already.
Oh, it's fine. It's an open-ended format.
People want to hear.
Okay, great. So the other big career advice I have to give people is embrace imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is your friend. If you don't have one, go get it. Mm-hmm. Because like when both of you wrote the book, did you know where it's going to take you? You had no idea. I'm guessing.
No. In fact, I remember, asking myself, well, who are we to write this book? There's I would say more on paper, more qualified people to write this. Why are we writing this? But then you realize nobody else is going to write this. Nobody has written it. There's a reason you're writing it, right?
So literally, I'm pretty sure this was your experience as mine. You literally start every day with a blank sheet of paper and you're wondering, what am I going to do? Where am I going to take it? By end of the day, there's such a sense of accomplishment. It's like, wow, this just magically took shape. And so my career advice is just keep doing it. And, you get just better and better at it, but just don't stop. Like, just keep doing it. Find a project and just start. You may suck at it in the beginning, but then the end result will be great. So
that's awesome advice. And Scott Taylor says, "Good morning, Scott. I'm trying to have imposter syndrome, but I'll just fake it." Well, you can do that too. So
Scott is one of the few people who doesn't have imposter syndrome, apparently.
Yes. Scott and I met up at MIT CDO IQ, and we decided to do a podcast together. Actually, we did so many that in 2 days. He and I did one. Malcolm Hawker, who's his buddy from the Dun & Bradstreet days, and was my Gartner colleague covering NDM. Malcolm and I did one. The three of us did one. The two of them, it's like we were doing this, and literally it was a riot. We were just laughing the whole time. It was so funny.
That's super cool. Actually, Malcolm's gonna be on the show this spring. So
wow.
Yeah, stay tuned for that. Yeah. Popped into our meetup with Jamak the other night, and I had some really good commentary and feedback. So it's really good. Well, cool. So we're going to talk about the current market conditions affecting the IT landscape. I think by IT we mean probably tech, data, and related stuff. But I mean, what's been on your mind, Sanjeev? What's going on in the current market?
So some of the things I'm. It's no surprise that IT spending is now being looked at very carefully, and I'm using my words also very carefully because I don't want to send a message that IT spending is going down, because it's not really going down, but it's being scrutinized. In fact, I would say spending in the cloud is going up tremendously. We saw last quarter 30-some% growth for all the hyperscalers. So But people are being very careful in how they spend money. They don't want to spend money on, let's say, buying servers and installing stuff. So managed services is really big these days. Every day I see, there's a new SaaS product. Even databases that are coming out are intentionally being very SaaS centric. And the most important thing I feel, what makes a big difference is user experience, whether it's ease of using as an end user, like low code, no code, or it's developer experience, or it's managing an administration experience. So just, that I've seen is a very big movement. We saw Figma got massive buyout, because it's just so easy to use. Even in our space, DBT, I think, didn't like. If you look at DBT, when it came out, it was a command line SQL data transformation tool. Really, I mean, that's it. But with the whole DevOps integration, which was something super smart. But it's so easy to use. We saw MongoDB, Snowflake became so big because it's SaaS. You don't have any management overhead, and you can just focus on your business problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I'd add to that is what we've seen it quite a bit is that companies have locked in with an on-prem, say, data warehouse vendor, so like Teradata, Oracle, and every few years they have to sign a new contract. And at some point they see that cliff coming and they're like, wait, we don't want to spend several $1 million all at once. We'd rather just pay as you go. Then you combine that with the user experience and they're ready to make the leap to the cloud. It's not easy. It's actually really hard to transition from an existing tool to a new one, but it's worth it because they don't want to be locked in with that size of contract anymore.
That is true. Yes. Yeah. And talking about vendor lock-in, the other interesting thing that we are also starting to see, actually we've been seeing it for many years, but this year especially it came to front, is this open standards. So I'm not, Parquet came out 10 years ago, and but then this year we saw a rise of Iceberg, Hoodie, Delta. So, but now, like today, so let's say, Matt, you are a big fan of Dremio, for example, and Joe, you like Athena, and I like to use, let's say, Tableau. It doesn't matter, what engine we use, query engine we use, or the front BI engine. If we can switch it, like if I can put my data in Parquet files on an S3 compatible object store, put a table format representation on top, and then I can use Presto, I can use Starburst, any tool that I want to bring. So I have now decoupled my storage layer from my query engine, and this open standard makes things so much more flexible and agile.
Yeah, especially the whole managed open source or managed standards play seems to be really, really big, right? Like DBT, where you can get the open source, you can get the cloud version. Yeah, completely agree with that. I mean, I think what people have discovered with pure open source, going back to the ops discussion, is it can be really, really hard to manage, especially with a small team. But they still want the portability, and so this gives you a hybrid. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this, show?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. It's I mean, it's all about trade-offs, though, right? So it's so what's up?
No, talk about trade-offs. Here is something really interesting. Kubernetes is open source, but Kubernetes is super complicated for people.
I agree.
Yeah. Now there is an easy way out. You can go to the cloud, and use like EKS or AKS or GCE. The Elastic Kubernetes services from AWS, Azure Kubernetes services, or Google, not Compute Engine, the
Kubernetes engine.
Yeah, Kubernetes and GK. Yes. So you can use that, and that sort of takes you away. But even then, there's a lot of complications. So a lot of companies are starting to ask. In fact, one exciting. Sorry, this is now sounding like I'm all over the place. But there's another super interesting technology which is finally coming into prominence after 5 years of being around, and that's WebAssembly. Where now write my business logic in
Mhm.
any language I want. Any language. It could be not just Java or JavaScript or SQL. I can write it in Rust. I can write it in Go, compile it into a binary form called WebAssembly, WASM, and run it in my browser
Mhm.
without any Docker and Kubernetes overhead. So this is the world we are living in, where this, the ease of use is becoming really critical.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember who was it? Bailey Hayes and Julie Price gave a demo at my meetup several months ago where they showed off Wasm in the browser. I think they're playing a video game, or no, they had a video game. They're collecting video game stats in real time with Wasm. I think it was easily one of the coolest tech demos I've ever seen.
Yeah, I love hanging out with Bailey. I saw her when she was at Single Store before, I think,
Yeah.
Cosmonic. She's the one who introduced me to Wasm, and it took me a while to wrap my head around it.
Same, right? Because it's not intuitive. It's like, oh, the browser. But then, then you start seeing all the other, Mother Duck just announced their giant Series A last week, and that's, I'm
Yes.
guessing, has an awesome play to it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, the
Right.
fact that you can basically have a remote database and you can run all your computations locally as long as they're small, that's amazing. It's basically like JavaScript on steroids, right? Like it's like the JavaScript model that completely took over web apps, and now it's just a whole different scale of flexibility. Like
Yeah,
you were saying. Yeah.
Andrew says here, Wasm is very promising for the evolution of containers. I
Right.
think there's a lot to that. Yep.
And the funny thing is that when you're in the container world, you need Kubernetes to do your orchestration of containers. But the Wasm community can use Kubernetes, but they are on purpose going with something more lightweight. And I don't know, this space is not my forte, but they use Nomad as their orchestration engine, so which is a very lightweight, easier to use.
So we're in a market shift right now, obviously. Maybe we can talk about kind of what you think got us here, and what do you think is next? Really easy questions, I know. So
no, this is good. So another very big shift is again talking about the same topic of the economics, the macroeconomics being what they are. There's a huge emphasis on cost optimization. We spent all these years, if we were talking last year, it would be all about performance. How can I get the highest, best performance? This year, it's like, okay, we need performance, no question about it, but at what cost? So cost optimization is really big. I see FinOps is the term that people are using. So I see that shows up all the time. For example, I was discussing this just yesterday with a provider who's come up with this method of doing compute push down into Snowflake. And I was like, well, that's great, but it's not just about pushing the cost down to Snowflake. It's instead of doing it in a Spark compute engine, you really have to do a TCO and see which one is cheaper. It's not like one is better than the other. So data observability, by the way, is a topic that I've looked at quite a bit. One of the big areas of data observability that did not exist last year, is FinOps. Last year, it was all about how can I infer the quality of my data, and how can I infer the quality or the reliability of my pipeline. This year, there's a new Venn diagram circle, and that's called FinOps. Understanding what is the cost of this query before I run the query, predicting what is. So basically, when you observe the data, now you're observing the cost, and you're drawing out sort of like a trend. You're doing the trend analysis, and you're saying, well, this is my cost during midweek and then weekend, but then every month is going up 5%, 10% because I'm doing more volume. So by next year, my cloud cost is going to go up so much, and I need to budget. So doing that prediction. So this FinOps piece just got added this year into observability space.
So we're basically talking about cost observability, which can be like long-term cost reporting, like what am I spending for the last week, versus maybe dynamic cost reporting, like what am I spending right now, and why am I spending so much money at this very minute?
Well, and Matt, I think as we're fond of pointing out too, and you hit on this in the book, FinOps is a two-edged sword, right? It's about cost as well as revenue potential.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. It's not just about cost incurred, is what you're saying, right?
Right.
It's about,
yeah. How can we make more money with this?
And because observability sits on top of the monitoring substrate, if you may, so the moment the cost goes beyond expected range, then you basically kick off the whole workflow that alerts the right people. Maybe it kills the job, but if it kills the job, then the downstream application will get affected. So the whole pipeline orchestration needs to be adjusted. So it's not like it's a trade-off, like we are saying. You cannot just. And this is what makes data so interesting, because if all this time we've been talking, like IT industry has been talking about applications. Applications can be serverless. If an application is going awry, just kill it and restart it. But you cannot do that with data, because you'll corrupt the data. It'll be inconsistent, right? So this is why data is such a complicated space. It has a state. It has to be ACID. So that's what makes it fun.
Well, let's go back to what we were talking about earlier, Sanjeev, about the user friendliness of these modern data tools. And the other thing that's a key pitch, right, is the flexibility, where if I suddenly need to run a huge machine learning job, I can spin up 1,000 nodes to do that. Right. But of course, with that comes the need to just constantly monitor. And yeah, it's a super complicated space. I feel like that's the next generation of cloud advancements. Now that we have the tools, the next 5 years is going to be really about FinOps, about figuring out how to optimize the tools way better than we've done so far.
Right. Yeah. So Matt, just on this topic, so we tout elastic scale as one of the such a big advantages of being in the cloud, and it truly is. Elastic infinite scale. It's not infinite, but you can scale. But when you start taking a deeper look, you realize that scale stories is not always that rosy. Like, you can scale up, but can you really scale down, and how quickly can you scale down? And also, what are you scaling up? Let's say I have a 16 node cluster, and my requirement has gone up. I need just a tad bit more compute. What do I scale up to? A 32 node cluster. Really? I mean, I just needed one node, and I've gotten 16 nodes that I'm paying for. Yep. Is it really worth that elastic scale? So anyway, I'm just saying that what's a granularity of scale? How quickly can you scale? Are you scaling your compute and your storage and your network? And is the scale down happening pretty quickly? I mean, there are all these factors that you have to think about, and so the term scalability at a high level sounds very promising, but then in reality, you really have to understand the cost, and see maybe there are cases where your job is constantly running, so there is no opportunity to scale. It's just chock-a-block, and this is where sometimes clients will look at on-prem and say, if a certain workload is not taking advantage of cloud's inherent advantages, then could I run it cheaper on premises?
And especially if it's a very stable, predictable workload that runs every day.
Yes. Yeah, like what Basecamp's article, wrote about, where it's like, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But at that point, you're a very stable, mature company. So if it's that predictable too, I guess you're in a different spot in the grand scheme of things, right? So you could probably run your company on like a Raspberry Pi if you wanted to. I don't know.
Correct. So. See, this is what DuckDB, Mother Duck, these people are saying is that hardware has become so advanced now that you can do amazing things without having to think about this distributed and global architectures that are parallel. You can do amazing stuff like on our M1 chip Apple Macs these days.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I mean, look at. I mean, we all have M series Max, I'm guessing, but I mean, these things are straight out of science fiction.
Yeah.
They're amazing. So
Right.
and it's crazy when you think about they're just getting started too. The amount of power they're going to have, and the other thing, Jordan Tigani said, from Mother Duck was, because he's a PM at BigQuery, and we may have had the same interview actually, but it was when you look at the data sizes companies were using, they were very small. It's called an easy query, not BigQuery, because even though it's made for big data sizes, I mean, most data sizes just you can put them on a laptop. It's not that hard. So.
Well, I think what we're seeing, the next stage of cloud basically is more integration between the cloud and the edge. And that's basically what Jordan was getting at too. It's like, okay, we've shown that you can do things really simply in the cloud, but if you're just querying even 100 megabytes or a gigabyte of data, your laptop can totally do that. And so you want a continuum where if I run a query and it's small, it just runs locally. And if I run a query and it's big, it then gets pushed up to more hardware, which potentially can save you a ton of money. And we saw this happen before with web apps, right? So when the iPhone came out within a few years, a lot of things were running locally with JavaScript, but then you always had this remote backend for heavy computing. And so now that's basically coming down to data. I think the other important thing here to recognize is this creates more consistent environments. So you don't have to worry about potential breakage with like bad dependencies on your laptop, which is a constant headache. I can't tell you how much time I've spent dealing with those kinds of things. And you too, Joe, I assume.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm addressing an issue in the comments here. Apparently,
okay.
LinkedIn is being LinkedIn again. So it's basically starting people over in the video.
Let's hear it.
What's that?
What is the comment? Let's hear it.
Oh, let's hear the comment. Yeah. So Shelly Warren says, this is the third time the video has jumped back a few minutes on LinkedIn. So I provided an alternate YouTube link. And as well, we'll be posting this to Spotify and other podcasts. Came to find out you can actually watch video and audio on Spotify. So there you go.
Is Elon Musk also running LinkedIn as well as Twitter? Is that what's happening now?
By the way, these days, literally, I'm enraptured by Twitter and FTX.
Oh, yeah. Tell us more.
So anyway, I want Twitter. I don't want to touch that topic, but FTX is super interesting, and I don't want to go into the whole debacle of FTX because that's a whole episode. I listened to All In this. Yeah, and they've done quite an amazing job. But I can tell you there's a fallout of FTX that's already happening in our industry, and it actually pertains to the topic that we're discussing today. I advise a lot of startup companies that are in the process of raising funds, and all of a sudden VCs have become really skittish because of FTX. I was talking to one of my clients, and I was like, well, wait, why does the FTX debacle have to affect tech spending? Because it should really have some major impact on crypto. But it's the same VCs who are putting their money in all these places, so they are basically not. So the funding market, by the way, has literally come to a screeching halt right now. Some companies are getting a ton of funding, like we saw Mother Duck got $47.5 million last week, but more or less, there's a lot of angst in the industry. And so here comes the funny part. Again, last year, if we had talked about industry, we would have talked about growth. Today, growth is actually a dirty word. No one wants to talk about growth because growth is now equivalent to growth at any cost. So you have a software product, you charge 100,000 for that. The customer says, sorry, I can only pay 10,000. You say, okay, fine, 10,000, done. So now you have a marquee name, but no money. So today, the most important metric that companies will ask me sometimes, if they're asking me about a company, they'll ask me, what is the burn rate? So which is how much net money is outflowing from the company, because that will determine the longevity of that company in 2023.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. We talk to a lot of data, product companies for obvious reasons. They want our opinions on stuff. They want to partner. And the question I'd always ask back in the I would say the old days was, are you going for revenue or are you going for logos? Because that dictates how I'm going to operate as a partner with them, right? If they're just looking for logos, that's just a shotgun approach. If you're looking for revenue, now it's got to be a bit more dialed in terms of the sales approach, right? And so, back in the day, it was all logos.
Yeah.
Logos at all costs, frankly.
And we've seen that kill companies too. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that assessment, Joe, but to me, sometimes logo chasing can totally kill a company because they get a lot of really bad customers and they spend heavily on their sales team.
Well, it takes away from your core, whatever your core mission is, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to get logos, it's incentives and outcomes, as we always say on the show, and that's no different. But what I also remember too, just talking to some VCs in the good days, and they're like, "There's no way this ever ends," right? And so, well,
in the year 2000, I have to say that's the most fun I had in my career. Money was no object. I was at that time living in London, in Kensington, all expense paid. .com boom was happening, irrational exuberance, as they used to call it. At that time, the whole thing was eyeballs. How many eyeballs do we get? And I thought we had learned our lesson, but to your point, like it seems like we don't learn our lessons. We just make the same mistakes.
Oh no, there was what was that book? A book, .con, I think, that came out around 2002. I don't know if you ever read it, but I reread it recently, like last year, and I was like, holy crap! Like you could basically just change the names, it'd be the same thing. And what and again, what happened was the Fed started raising rates back then. And that killed it. So among other things, I think, but if you have sort of shoddy fundamentals built on a rising rate environment, you can think of what happens.
So actually, I just got reminded of how crazy those times were. I was a data architect at that time, and I was helping. I had left Oracle, so I knew Oracle the best amongst all the other areas. So I would recommend Oracle to my clients, and they would be more than happy. And we would buy these Sun Microsystem E10,000, E10K systems. The funny thing is that we would go with the most beefed up machine we could buy. And then it dawned on me that Oracle was 32-bit at that time. It couldn't even address the amount of RAM we were buying. Literally, we were just throwing the money away. And there were billboards all over San Francisco from Sun Microsystems that said, "We are the dot" in .com. And, but no one minded, people were getting Ferraris as sign-up bonus for joining companies. So.
And then the sanity arrived. And the amazing thing is, I feel like right after the .com crash happened, there was a moment where it's like, well, maybe is the internet over? Are we still going to be using the internet in 5 years? And then you had Google, they were founded before the crash, but they started taking off, and Amazon continued to do well. And it's like, oh, okay, maybe this internet thing has some legs, but we just kind of got out of hand, basically.
Oh yeah, I remember it's kind of ironic. My dad got me an internet connection way early, like I think 91 or 2 or something like that. So I mean, but at the same time, he's like, oh, this thing's a fad. Nobody's ever going to use this crap. But he's like, just throwing me a bone. And but when everything crashed, it's like, see, told you, things going away. It's like, no, it's not.
In late 1990, like 98, 99, you could buy a 56K baud, if you remember those, set-top boxes for $3,000. 56 kilobits per second.
Well, that was fast back then too.
Yes, that was
at 9600.
That was 56K was this ISDN speed. It was like, whoa, wow, you must be super rich to afford 56K. So,
it's crazy. And I was having the same conversation with my dad yesterday, because he's like, oh, crypto, that's going to zero. And I'm like, no, it's not. Like it still has utility. We just got to figure it out and flush out a lot of the excess behaviors like FTX, for example. I think it's a poster child of it, but I think long term it's got a lot of potential, but you just need to wade through a lot of the garbage to get there. Crypto I think is uniquely situated where it just attracts scammers and people like that in a level that is just it's like MLM type levels basically.
Yeah.
So
I mean, if nothing else, I hate to say this, but if nothing else, it will continue to be used by organized crime, which means other people will.
Well, of course it was, but I mean, so was the internet. So.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. Yeah, and there's a really good book, Carlota Perez. What is it? Technological Revolutions in Finance, or something like that. Financial Revolutions. I can't remember the exact title of it, but she talks about the boom bust cycles in technology. And really, what I'm fascinated by is what's next, right? Like I think we're going through a very pivotal moment in real time right now. It's always interesting to realize you're going through a historical event while it's happening, because you're not quite sure what the day brings. So, as we're seeing every day, you wake up and it's like, oh, okay, FTX, that was a house of cards, cool. What else is what's next?
Yeah.
So.
It's amazing with all the stuff that we learn from social media like LinkedIn and news, all the things that are going on. Our lives are literally 24/7 now, right? I mean, it's just hard to switch off. I mean, if you switch off, then you pay a price. I know it sounds horrible because it's like, wait, you gotta have a work-life balance, but it's just so much development going on. In fact, if somebody says, "Oh, you're an expert in something," I'm like, "No, you were an expert till yesterday, but this morning the world changed.
Yep.
You have to open the books and learn what the heck just came out, because there's new stuff coming out all the time."
All the time.
Yeah.
And what's interesting too is I find it's the things that aren't obvious that are sometimes the most important ones.
Mm-hmm.
So because the obvious ones, everyone's paying attention to it, so the narrative's already been written and there's a lot of attention, so it's it's already a known thing. But
right,
yeah,
it's data products. What do you guys think about data products? I like that concept. I'm just curious.
I really like it too. Yeah. Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, no, I'm just clearing my throat. Go for it.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I mean, I feel like, so going back to the ease of use discussion, I feel like all these simple to use tools really facilitate data products, because what happened back in the Hadoop era? Well, the teams had to spend all their time just maintaining systems, right? There really wasn't a lot of mental space for product mindset on data. And now when I have managed services, be it Databricks or Snowflake, I can just say, all right, here's my tool. What am I actually going to do with it? It allows higher order thinking, I think.
I mean, I was writing about this weekend. A book I keep referring back to over and over is an old 1996 book called Lean Thinking. And what I really like about the principles of lean is, when you look at the concept of, or the definition of value, for example, right? It's like, well, it's whatever the customer ultimately decides it is. There's nothing more, nothing less to that definition. But when you apply lean to designing products, for example, right, it's always focusing on what does a customer want, right? And so I think that this thinking is really becoming more front and center with data, whereas before it was very internally focused. It's like, well, what's convenient for us to build as a data team, or what's potentially going to move the needle? I don't know. But it seems a lot more customer oriented, just like a traditional product is, like a candy bar or an iPhone. And so I'm glad to see, for me, what data products really means is orienting, data practices towards, value creation for the end customer.
Yeah. In fact, I was also writing this weekend a paper on data quality, and I was suggesting in that data quality should be like, sorry, I'm gonna backtrack a bit. You have data products, then data contracts are also becoming quite popular. So I was like, if a data product has a contract, then data quality metrics should be part of that. So data quality should become a first-class citizen rather than something that the consumers discover and they try to fix. The data producer should take ownership, put the data quality SLA or some metrics in it. you know, and when the consumer gets it, the consumer should then have a view of how much they should be able to trust the data, but what is the makeup of that data? So I don't know how you feel about it, but I was just thinking the role of modern data quality this weekend.
Well, these two are inseparable in a lot of ways, right? I think it's about expectations and processes. What I equate data contracts to is in manufacturing, there's a bill of materials, right? It tells you the components and the manufacturing process that you're going to use to make a product. To me, a contract is a very similar notion where it provides criteria for acceptance and what can I expect out of this.
So Joe, I have to push back on that a bit because bill of materials is how I'm going to build my manufacturing good. The consumer should never see that because the consumer shouldn't see the whole sausage making. To me, the contract is between the producer and the consumer.
I guess what the consumer in the sense, I suppose, I see your point. So the consumer in this case would be sort of like sub-process in manufacturing.
I'm an iPhone user, and Apple has some contract that says this is what this phone does.
Yeah. So if you're a Foxconn, for example, right, it'd be like, okay, in this assembly line, like this BOM, this MRP process applies to this part. To me, that's what contracts are. But at the end of the day, but consumer is one of these things where it's kind of like it's a very fractal term where you can it's consumers all the way down, I suppose.
Correct. No, I see your point. Great. If you have Foxconn, then your contract is a bill of material.
Yeah,
you have to build that product.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like iPhone, right? Like this is what everyone here uses or some variant of that, right? And so, but ultimately this is what everyone's trying to build is is this, which is a fantastic device, by the way. A lot of complexity in that.
This is by the way, this also brings up the point that I was writing about this weekend on data quality, that just like a data contract means different things to different consumers. So data quality is the same thing. I was writing how if I'm in finance and I'm talking about a customer, to me, the customer is the person who's paying the bill. Matt, if you're in sales, you're concerned about the guy who's buying the software. And Joe, if you're in marketing, you're concerned about the decision maker, the influencer. So, and we're all calling these three different personas customers. There are three different definitions depending upon where you come from. Now you say, okay, we need to have a consistent definition of customer. The data quality comes in, but you won't have a consistent definition. You'll have, this is where quality gets tricky, because when you start counting and doing metrics, you get different results. Because I've seen the same thing for employees. For HR, the employee may mean FTEs and contractors. For some, it may not. For some, it may be a different meaning. So you ask a very large company, how many people work for you? You get different answers depending upon who you talk to.
That's interesting. I'm reading a really good book right now, Data and Reality. It was written in, I think, 1978 or 79. I've been digging into a lot of classics lately because I'm kind of a retro hipster like that. But the example you give is actually incredibly. So the author, last name is I can't remember his first name, but it was he talks about this in depth. It's like, okay, so when you're talking about a term like an employee, what do you mean by that exactly? Is it an employee that's in a department, or can you work in two departments, and then on and on down the chain, right? So it opens your eyes to, I think, that the fact that the world is really messy, and all we're doing is doing our best to sort of describe what's an acceptable construct to represent that messy reality.
So the reality is messy, and data is a digital representation of that mess.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, data equals mess.
It's especially structured data.
Yeah.
Structured data. You can always take video, right? You can video everything around you to try to get some representation of reality. That's not super useful for most accounting questions, for example, or to count the number of employees you have.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's why Bill Inman, for example, he's focused on text data. I think he kind of, after he did structured data decades ago, he's like, oh, text is far more interesting, at least for him. So I could see his point in that. It's also really messy, and so there's a reason it's really hard. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, data quality is one of these things. And because I'm writing a book on modeling right now, or I'm going through, I'm on the research phase of a lot of it. But yeah, what I'm realizing is everyone throws out modeling techniques, for example, right? Which should achieve some notion of quality at the end of the day, one of the expected outcomes. But what I'm also realizing is there's just through the data life cycle, right? There's different ways of modeling, but there's appropriate techniques that don't always apply to every stage of the life cycle, and so it's been interesting. So yeah.
Well, and the things you're talking about here, Joe, bring to mind, I have a couple of thoughts bubbling up here, but in particular, the traditional focus of modeling has been very mathematical almost, right? And I'm a math person. Like I love math. I love like thinking about very rigid ways of defining things. But I guess the whole point of modeling really is to figure out this question of representing the real world. Like, yes, there are mathematical constraints you need to think about. You need to think about things like facts and dimensions. But the real questions are about how you're representing the real world. And that's the really tough part that we're not maybe spending enough time thinking about.
So talking about data modeling, the one interesting thought that crossed my mind was when Amazon AWS came out with DynamoDB, there was very little guidance on how to model document databases. Until AWS went on this highly political PR game of migrating 3,000 Oracle databases into AWS. That's when they finally realized, oh, wow, we need a modeling tool for DynamoDB, because they had to. And then we came out with it and made it available to the customers, So it's interesting how the world I come from, data modeling was the very first thing I did for any new database. I would fire up Irwin. Irwin by far was my favorite product on my computer. And I would think in enterprise relationship diagrams all the time. If somebody gave me a problem, a real life problem, I would start breaking it down into a table with primary key and foreign key. This is how much I was into data modeling. But then once we moved into the so-called big data space, we just forgot about data modeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, but now it's coming back, right? So with a vengeance. I mean, I got a message today from somebody asking, "Hey, I'm thinking about writing a book on data modeling. Any guidance on this?" And I'm like, "You're like the fourth person, including myself, who's potentially writing a book." There's, maybe fifth actually. There's 3 others that I know of, including myself. So that person would be the 5th. So, but as I told the person, happy to guide in ways that would make it unique and, and worth your time to write, because writing a book's hard. But I also realized, and I always tell Matt this too, like content's one of these things, right? Really, it's not a 0-sum game. It's not like because you write a book doesn't mean that another book in the subject. I mean, I actually I'm glad that this is happening right now, because I feel like the world of modeling, for example, has been there hasn't been a ton of attention, I would say, in new thinking in it. And so you get these talks at Coalesce, for example, DBT's conference, that hearsay, like most of the attendees had no idea what data modeling is. And so, and it's cool. You're exposing people to new ideas. And I think that's how the industry evolves. So, speaking of evolution, I suppose, what do you think's next in the IT landscape?
So talking about Coalesce, I think one very interesting thing, one of the biggest announcements was a semantic layer. So up until last year, I was reading about Airbnb, Minerva, metric layer, and now we are saying that a metric layer is basically a component of the whole semantic layer. So semantic layer is not just giving a business meaning to technical attributes so they're easy to be used, but it's got calculations, it's got performance enhancements like caching of data, and semantic layer is yet another attempt to disaggregate and decouple parts of our architecture. So I'm not going to hard code my revenue calculations in Power BI. I'll put in a semantic layer and then democratize it. make it available for anyone. So more reuse, So I think that's another interesting thing I saw that came out of Coalesce. Would you agree?
I think so. And then shout out to Looker for making what I think was one of the first popular semantic layers back in the day.
You're very good. Looker, I think the history should be remembered here. The credit goes to business objects.
Oh, that's right.
In 1990s, there were these two guys who were in Oracle France, and they were going from customer to customer telling them there's this brand spanking new database that had just come out called Oracle. And by the way, you write SQL and this is how you do it. And people are like, well, we like the concept of a relational structured SQL database, but why are we having to write my reports in these convoluted SQL? So they came out with this universe. I think the first semantic layer was created by business objects by these two sales engineers in France, who are now very well known, obviously. And then they created business object. But Looker has done a great job. Look, ML, I'm sure you guys know that pretty well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those concepts. I mean, if you don't have that, and even if your entire team, even if your entire company can write really good SQL, you just get massive SQL sprawl where you get just hundreds and hundreds of inconsistent reports, and it's a total nightmare. So, yeah, it's like you say, Joe, right? Everything comes back into vogue eventually. Basically, the pendulum swings, and we end up back where we started. What's old is new again.
Yeah.
Just kind of redo the ideas and hopefully come up with better versions in each iteration.
Are there any macro trends that you think are going to, I guess, become a bit more prominent?
Governance, security, privacy, regulations. In fact, in California, we are literally 6 weeks now away from CCPA going away and being replaced by CPRA. So CCPA. So see, this is what happened in California. California, I love California in spite of all its problems. So they're trendsetters. So they decided that they needed a data privacy law. So they started working on it a few years ago, but as it got closer and closer, it got watered down by special interest groups, and something got taken away, and more things got taken away, and we ended up with CCPA. But over the years, the residents approved a new compliance regulation called California Privacy Regulations Act or something like that, CPRA. Don't quote me on the acronym. But CPRA is much closer to GDPR. It is much stricter. It is no longer open to be contested by just about anybody. And there are some pretty stringent laws. It comes into effect on 1st of January. So now I think Utah also has a bill pending, if I'm not mistaken.
We have something. I don't know what it is.
Right. Yeah.
And for a state that prides itself on not having a lot of laws, I was a bit surprised.
Everyone has to jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah. So there are about only 4 or 5 states at this point, but I think we'll see in 2023. And this is just in the US. Globally, there are just regulations all over the world. So data residencies become really big. So to me, that's a very big topic. How do you protect security and privacy? There is a brute force way that we've done in the past. The brute force way was, I have an enterprise data warehouse, if such a thing existed. But again, going back to the same example, Matt, you're in sales, Joe, you are in marketing. You need to see data that's specific to your needs. Joe should be allowed to see the entire data births because he wants to run a campaign telling people it's your birthday, come buy my software at some discount. But Matt, you should not see people's entire date of birth, but you should be able to see some other aspects. So how did I solve this? By giving you a data mart, which is a view of data, but now I'm doing more ETL and I'm creating more redundant copies of data. So a big trend is, can we not just make copies? How can we dynamically give you access to only the data you are authorized to see, and not just create roles after roles, because that's the other problem, but have some sort of a dynamic policy mechanism. So if I relocate from the US to Germany, then all of a sudden, based on where my residency is, it checks my residency with an attribute, so attribute based access control, and only shows me data for Germany, because by law, if due to GDPR. So this is, to me, a huge topic, which literally has fallen through the cracks. And the reason is because you've got security that falls under CISO, data that's run by the CDO. Then you've got these other people. CIO has pieces of data. So data is fragmented. Nobody no organization right now has centralized the control of data. So that's why you see so many data breaches. And so I think the trend is to bring data security closer to data management, hopefully under one group that is responsible. By the whole FTX debacle is because of that, because no one in the US can tell whether crypto is a security or a commodity. So SEC doesn't care about it, FTC doesn't care about it, and you see what happened. So security right now is in that same space. Is it CISO's responsibility, or private DPO, or CDO, or VP of engineering? So that's an interesting topic.
I think a lot of people are going to start caring now. That's so going back to what you were saying, Joe, about crypto not going away. I think you're right, but I think there's going to be a lot of scrutiny for the next couple of years.
Well, this is how crypto succeeds. You have to go through these things.
You have to have a pullback. Yeah,
I mean, it's not like fiat currencies didn't have the same problem back in the day, or gold or silver or whatever. It's like, yeah, it gets stolen a lot. People are greedy. That's why you got to put in controls. And so, but then again, you had Bernie Madoff, right, and Lehman Brothers and all this other stuff, and you had to have regulations as a result of that. So it's not like this stuff stops anytime. It's just greed is an underlying thing where I think right. And you're only talking about the greed that you discovered.
Yeah. So one thing that I'd love to get your views, that I'm battling with. So in Europe, there's this whole cloud concentration risk idea, which says you cannot rely on one cloud provider. What if this cloud provider goes away? Then what happens? I just don't understand how will this pan out, because banks now have petabyte scale databases. You can egress petabyte into a different cloud provider, right? I mean, imagine that egress cost.
Catastrophic.
Also, let's assume a cloud provider goes down in a certain part of the world, and will the second cloud provider be able to take the entire load? Do they have that much capacity sitting idle? So what do you think of that?
That's a good question. I mean, I almost think that we're going to start seeing more almost let's call them meta cloud services, where their services designed to integrate across clouds. And Joe, you've talked about the egress question. Maybe give your thoughts on that.
Well, I suspect that at some point egress fees will go the way of cell phone minutes. But right now there's no implicit need to do that. I mean, Oracle sort of did that with when they signed up Zoom apparently, but I suspect at some point it's a prisoner's dilemma issue, right? So somebody's going to cave at some point. They're going to have to. So because as you point out, I just think the consumers are going to want that sort of flexibility. So.
Yeah, when a bank comes to you and says, we'll sign if we can get a discount on egress fees and a couple of other concessions. And by
discount, I mean zero, by the way.
Right,
so,
right.
Thank you. Yeah, because I mean, you going down, I shouldn't have to be penalized for getting my data out, right?
Correct.
But I mean, that it's easy to sit here and talk about that, but I think from a technical perspective, it's still really difficult too. I mean, because that assumes also you have some sort of a high network throughput to move data that quickly, and in case there's an emergency, and I don't know. There's a lot of things at play, things that probably not qualified to talk about either, which is most things actually. So, but
Yeah, correct. But it's good to have this discussion.
yeah,
Because whether we can solve the problem or not, we still have to live with this problem.
yeah. Well, I
Why?
think about it. I think about it in the context of data mesh too, for example, right? So for that to work, say I wanted to share across what's called platforms. I don't know if it's cloud or not, but there might be potential costs associated with sharing of data products. And what does that amount to? You want to talk about FinOps in the extreme? Talk about that case, for example,
Right. Yeah.
right? Because now it's like, oh, I have to share my petabyte scale data product with somebody else. Okay, how much does that cost again? A lot.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for one shot, and say that they keep querying it over and over and over again, like how do you build in cost resiliency into that so you don't go bankrupt in about 2 seconds? So you get I think what's going to happen is that kind of stuff you're going to get DDoSed.
Yeah.
And malicious players are like, cool, you know what I can do to you? Hurt you real bad. So this might be kind of fun.
The whole decentralized data mesh has to coexist with centralization, in my opinion. For example, I'm trying to access the same sort of like resources that you both are. How am I going to make sure I have consistent policy, security, data access policies applied across different domains? That to me, the last principle is federated computational governance, but I think a lot of common definition, business glossary, access, I cannot imagine having that be decentralized. To me, that just sounds chaos.
I'm not sure how that would work.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do it, but then you're kind of back to where we just started, which is like fragmented definitions and everything. And so
then you're silos, right? Then data
Yeah.
mesh is a silo. Every domain has a silo, and they're repeating the access control, the management, the cataloging of data, and then somebody has to synchronize it. So you need a catalog of catalogs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And for people who are interested in learning about the technical aspects of data mesh or the hard parts, I suppose check out the Utah Data Engineering Meetup chat. Jamak did an Ask Me Anything with us last week, and I thought it was probably one of the better conversations we had with data mesh. Not because it was at our meetup, but because it was a really good combo. So
yeah, I saw the video. You had a poster.
That was hers. Yeah, she hand wrote her slides. So she's very, very bespoke. So she'll sell them at a farmer's market or something. So
next to the pasteurized milk.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. We're coming up on time, but Sanjeev, for people who want to learn more about you, how can they do that?
LinkedIn is the best way.
Awesome.
Reach me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. I feel like we can keep talking for days, and we'll see you at reInvent next week. So hopefully I'll hang out for a bit. So awesome.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Anytime. I have to have you back. Yeah. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. Great audience participation too. Great questions, comments. A lot of people still stuck around here too, which is awesome. So that's great. Next week, I think it's going to be Matt and me. Matt, if you're up for a show, we can do that. Otherwise, if you're having a turkey hangover, then
let me try to work out my schedule for Monday, and we can jump on and do something. That'll be fun, even if it's just short. And we talk about a couple of. There's so much going on right now. To your point earlier, Sanjeev, about you're only an expert until yesterday, basically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's so much happening right now that I feel like we have to continue the conversation. Even if it's
next Monday that you're planning, it'll be a torrential deluge of AWS activity.
It's gonna be a lot.
Yeah.
It's that's gonna be an interesting one. I'm always excited to see what they come out with. So it'll be fun.
Yeah, and by the way, it's not even just AWS. AWS only has to announce one thing, and there are 500 software developers that announce their support for that. So that's the effect.
Yeah, that's awesome. They're a juggernaut, that's for sure. So and the week after that, let me see, I'm going to look at my calendar here real quick. I'm really crappy with times. Sorry, everybody. On the 5th, we got Ole Olesenbagno. I think I'm pronouncing your name right. So he wrote a recent book on enterprise data catalogs on O'Reilly, and very smart person. So I think the week after that, we got Sarah Catanzaro from Amplify on. So she's good. And then who's on after that? I think is it. I think that's it for them. You know, it's holidays and stuff. So, but
Yeah.
cool. Awesome.
Speaking of which, yeah, if you're in the U.S., happy Thanksgiving, and if you want to celebrate it outside the U.S., then great.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll hopefully see you next week.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you
All right,
for
see you,
joining
everybody.
us. It's fantastic.
All right. Take care. Bye.